What I want to do today is to talk about a project that I've just finished, which was a project that was looking at designing digital tools that could be used both by communities but also by major cultural institutions to do storytelling and to do creative practice around archival content. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And very unusually for me, I've actually written it as a paper because I usually say far too much, so to constrain myself to 20 minutes, I've written it. So the project that I'm going to talk about resulted in the creation of a new storytelling platform called Yarn, which is just about to be launched, and I think offers insights into the use of co-creation methodologies and explores notions of voice, potential democratization of institutional cultures, changing concepts of the audience and creative intervention. And consequently, I want to argue for a commitment to partnerships between communities and cultural heritage institutions to develop digital interfaces that facilitate co-curation, that allow for the creative exploitation of materials and development of shared copyright models that open up cultural resources and perhaps normalize relationships between audiences and institutions in some form of open digital space. And the idea for Yarn originated as a result of the frustrations that I encountered on a previous community-based project that had been considering the reuse and repurposing of a series of archive films owned by the BBC that related to the 1984-85 miners' strike. And this previous project, called Strike Stories, worked with community members drawn from opposing sides in the strike to examine memories and archival materials associated with the strike, and examined issues of ownership of cultural memory and the desire for participants to use heritage materials to tell their own stories and add context to what they often felt were misrepresentative archival holdings. The project surfaced a strong community desire to take ownership of cultural resources that represented them and to enable them to use them in their own commemorations of difficult events and as a basis for developing their own collective histories. Community members wanted to embrace a clear form of affective labour and work collaboratively with archives to co-curate resources and add their knowledge and experiences. Now, within the scope of Strike Stories, we're not fully able to realise these aspirations, and we were limited in time and resources. We were, though, able to facilitate the making of a series of films by project members who revealed their own interests and concerns and offered a response to the archival record. However, we were only able to do this for a very limited number of people, and they themselves recognised the privileged position that they were in. And at the time, we were not able to incorporate original archive materials into their films because of copyright restrictions. Strike Stories did, however, offer a strong proof of concept and demonstrated the willingness of citizens to undertake cultural heritage work on their own terms. It also demonstrated the willingness of organisations like the BBC to begin to work collaboratively to open up resources and to explore new models of access and consider issues of copyright and models for community labour or so-called user-generated content. And in designing the current project, the Power Archive project, we were keen to draw out these frustrations and work with citizens and institutions to build tools that will allow for mass participation, ideally unfettered by copyright restrictions and with an equality of experience and ownership. The potential for participatory media to allow for greater equality and cross-community operability was something we regarded as possessing democratic potential within a specifically configured open cultural space. The aspiration to create a form of genuinely open digital space based on Habermas's concept of the public sphere was an attractive but problematic proposition. The digital sphere is only as open insofar as internet architectures, governments, and internet providers allow. However, we were keen to explore the concept in relation to an open space sitting between citizens and communities on the one hand and cultural institutions on the other. Both traditionally operate in different or restricted digital spheres and through strict protocols. As John Dovey has forcefully noted, and I quote, "The dynamics of collaboration and exploitation begin to shape new kinds of public space, micro-networks of solidarity, education, and intervention." And citizens are often currently invited into institutional spaces, such as museum web spaces, to view and perform certain kinds of defined and restricted activities. They may be able to access catalogues, view selected portions of collections, and are subject to the institutional interpretive voice. However, they are often severely limited in what they can do creatively and curatively. Acts of participation, when they are permitted, are often solicited, controlled, and institutionally framed. Our aspiration, and lots of people have said it's rather naive, was to try and break through these traditions and protocols. So to achieve this, we quickly recognised that co-production methods were essential and that we needed to ensure a parity of ownership within the project. So using methodologies that were being developed within the AHRC-funded Connected Communities programme and drawing on the expertise and the experiences of a broad coalition of community research projects, we designed our project. And the name Power Archive reflected the concept of a parallel archive, one in which there was an equality of ownership and responsibility for interpretation. The project, which was based at the School of Media and Communications at Leeds, subsequently worked with a diverse range of communities to begin to design and build a digital platform that would allow them to tell stories, present their own histories, research and work collaboratively. The project team aimed to co-design and build a range of digital resources that would enable communities to develop expertise and resilience. Our groups worked in partnership with academics from Leeds and York University, with a group of technology developers called Carbon Imagineering, and curators, archivists and IT specialists from the Science Museum Group and the BBC Archives to create our new resource. So over the course of the 18-month project, we created a series of tools that were designed to be intuitive and flexible, aiding users to develop projects that incorporated online heritage materials and allowing them to add their own materials in the form of photographs, films, text and sound recordings. We wanted to orchestrate existing web functions and innovate new tools that would allow people to work in a single space and draw together disparate and unconnected bodies of content. We also wanted to create a space in which every member could create and curate their own collections of materials, and where institutions like galleries and museums could post collections for public use and gather associative data. So once the communities had determined what they wanted to explore, we then engaged a range of institutional partners, drawn from the Science Museum Group, so the National Media Museum, MOSI particularly, and BBC Archives, to begin to provide content and materials to form the basis of these projects, and allowed these institutions in turn to explore their own relationships with communities and consider ways in which their content could be published and enhanced through crowdsourcing and public expertise. So the resulting resource Yarn facilitates a number of activities for users, and I wanted to summarise them very briefly for you here. So for citizens and communities, it means that they can tell stories, research cultural and historical themes, create collections, campaign, and be creative. They can develop links with other people and other communities that share similar interests and concerns. They can develop community projects and host collections of community and personal materials. They can keep control of their own IP by hot-linking their own content from third-party sites that they're currently using, for example, Facebook or Flickr or HistoryPin. They can explore stories and collections created by others, and they can showcase knowledge and personal experience. For archival and cultural heritage organisations, it means that they can do similar but different things as well. And they can also feature and promote their collections through the resource without fear of IP transfer because it works on hot links. They can register as an archive partner, brand collections of material, and use additional content management tools that we've designed. It means that they have access to an open workspace that can create new links to complementary collections, work with the public, and where people can mix their own content with that of other users and draw and develop public expertise. It means that museums can also source content metadata and receive analytics about who is using their content and where it's going. And they can run curation and research projects and encourage community use of their own digital collections. So I now want to touch very briefly on some of the theoretical perspectives that helped inform the way in which we worked with our communities and how we arrived at Yarn. So the project itself was conceived as a highly experimental, explorative and collaborative project from the outset. And we wanted to, I think, sort of work as openly and freely as possible. Out of this sort of initial dialogues emerged a range of digital tools and a repository of personal and institutional resources, but all of which were characterised by being researched and co-designed and evaluated equally by all project members. In doing so, the project made effective use of a number of ways of thinking and working that draw on a host of relevant approaches and theoretical perspectives drawn from existing literatures, especially in the areas of community-based participatory research, or CBPR, and crowdsourcing, I think which we're all probably familiar with. But to begin with, CBPR, which has its origins in public health work, and particularly in America, is understood as a collaborative approach to conducting research on equal footing amongst academic researchers and community members. And this was something that was fundamental to the approach that we took. Our second co-design approach embraced the notion of crowdsourcing, and of something that emerged, I suppose, within the business sector, but has increasingly become incorporated into heritage work. Within the business sector, it's obviously characterised, as I suspect, very largely as an exploitative form of collaborative working. But there seems to be a remaking of the concept within the heritage sector. And this sector has recently witnessed an emergent body of literature on crowdsourcing, which is based on co-curatorial and participatory rather than business transactions. And there is a search, I think, to find different types of value within these new models. As I've already noted, the key overarching objective of the project was to co-design and co-produce a new open digital access platform that would enable individuals and local community groups to research and document their histories via the creative linking of their own digital content, films, photographs, and other ephemera with archival material drawn from public institutions. Crucially, this involved us in an extended consideration of the transfer of IP and the copyright implications of collaborative practice, and also the value of labour in this context. All parties were concerned with the ownership of their things. On the one hand, communities were unwilling to surrender content to large institutions and see their materials ingested on a remote server over which they had no control or right to redress. On the other, museums and galleries, often handling third-party materials themselves, were concerned with the implications of publishing material not covered by Creative Commons models, especially when creative repurposing or reauthoring was the intended consequence of collaborative working. The outcome of these negotiations was a consensus of working in a context in which there was no direct transfer of IP, and in which institutional and private content could be linked from respective third-party sites through the use of hot links, orchestrating text, and tagging. In a similar manner, there was to be a collective approach to the ownership of content that was made on the site, with full accreditation of ownership of stories and reference materials. Authors and content providers retained the right to edit and ultimately remove materials, securing a sense of individual ownership that would also engender trust and confidence. Similarly, the recognition of the value of labour in such creative endeavour was crucial to establishing an equality of experience and opportunity. In treating this consideration, it's useful to situate our experience in relation to current critical framings of free labour and exploitative practices, often misleadingly presented as mutually rewarding. In his discussion of emergent ecosystems centred on new online collaborative documentary practices, John Dovey presents an analysis of critical positions perfectly applicable to other forms of collaborative labour in the cultural heritage sector. Considered within the context of a documentary ecosystem, he argues that assessing who is exploiting whom is perhaps the wrong question to ask. The assumed inequality of labour and reward predicated by significant post-Marxist critiques is not enough to understand what is happening in new forms of collaborative affective labour, and that a more nuanced understanding is necessary to fully explain engagement and innovation. These he characterises as new patterns of collaboration that constitute a new ecosystem where the mutuality of exchange creates the value that makes the system itself coherent and meaningful. His model of a negotiated and self-defining system of rewards is borne out, I think, by our experiences of working with and across communities and in differing practices and sets of aspirations. Given the complexity of this undertaking in terms of accommodating varying interests and needs and the needs of both local community groups and our institutional partners, it was essential to bring on board a group of technology developers who were also interested in developing with communities rather than for them. And we were very fortunate in working with a team called Carbon Imagineering, who really wanted the opportunity to co-develop specifications at a community level and then build the resources for the communities that were going to use them. And 4 local community groups were used as the part of the process. So we worked with a group of industrial archaeologists, community archaeologists, local historians, computer programmers, and filmmakers across the UK to co-develop the tools that we are hoping to launch in about a month's time. Now, the success of the project, if you like, primarily rested on our community partners, but was strengthened and guided by the support of the project's institutional partners, the Science Museum and the BBC. Their provision of expertise and content not only helped enrich many of the storytelling and historical research projects, but it also provided a model through which local communities and public cultural institutions could reconfigure the ways in which they relate to each other with a view to maintaining long-lasting collaborative partnerships. Public cultural organisations now recognise the role that the differently situated local community groups and interested members of the wider public can play in adding value to historical and cultural assets in a way that ensures the ongoing relevance of such assets. This recognition of an openness to collaborative engagement has facilitated some really exciting work and some ongoing projects that we're just beginning to develop, one of which is the creation of a digitised space, archival space. This is why I make you all seasick, and also take you all into your own collective traumas, because this is the dental collection of the Science Museum. And we're thinking about how you can link the archival space to objects within archives, and then we're thinking about how we can link this to stories and projects that people might want to tell. I won't close up on the drills, because it gave me nightmares the first time I tried that. If we go back to the slides, that would be great. So to conclude very quickly, because I think I've only got a couple of minutes left, I think what the project taught us was 5 important lessons, which I want to very briefly share with you. Firstly, I think it demonstrated and taught us the need for a commitment to partnership between communities and institutional partners to develop digital interfaces, to foster co-curation, creative exploitation, and shared copyright models. It highlighted the need for openness, for honesty, and the ability to listen as well as to speak. And it highlighted the value of recognising where expertise resides and of the importance of the plurality of voices in these projects. Secondly, it examined the role of co-curation within the development this context and highlights the importance of current approaches to the problems of liberating cultural resources from often formerly closed or remote cultural institutions. This we felt was a necessary democratic and moral undertaking. Thirdly, it allowed us to examine the tensions between different cultural sectors and draw on the experiences of institutional partners interested in exploring these approaches as a means of reaching out to new audiences and of drawing on public expertise to inform knowledge about their collections, particularly in a time of financial scarcity. Above all, it highlighted the need to negotiate and recognise mutual needs and to acknowledge barriers such as copyright that often, if you like, are a block to collaborative working. Fourthly, it has demonstrated the potential for developing social cohesion through collaborative working and collaborative storytelling, predicated on shared cultural understandings and shared cultural resources. It has shown the cumulative strength of working together to achieve commonly identified goals with clearly set expectations. And finally, it demonstrates the importance of openness, of the recognition of different levels of engagement, of different literacies, and of the value of mutual respect across communal and institutional boundaries. So, thank you.